Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our conversation about conflict management. I am Phillip Spearo of Workplace Investigations Now. We are HR's trusted workplace investigation partner. Our goal is to support our clients when they need an investigation, but also help foster a better workplace through coaching and conflict management. I'm looking forward to sharing my approach to conflict management and also looking forward to learning more from Paula about conflict management. And speaking of Paula, Paula is joining us today, and she is somebody that feels really strongly about better workplaces as well, coaching and conflict management. Paula, can you share a little bit about your organization?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. I started my business Leading Up Coach about 4 years ago, so 2019, because I spent about 30 years in my career in HR in a variety of locations, primarily hospitality. And I had some good work cultures and I had some not so good ones. And after a while, I realized one of the key things is the challenge with developing leaders. We train them, but we don't necessarily spend the time to develop those skills. And so I wanted to step out on my own to be able to help organizations do a better job at that and take it off of their plate so that I can just focus entirely on developing them. And when Phillip and I met a few weeks ago, we both were seeing the same things, is people are having a problem with conflict. We see it on the news every day. I see it with my clients. And so lately, my focus really has been using my experience and expertise in emotional intelligence to help people navigate conflict better. So that's a little bit about me and how I got to where I am now.
Paula, thank you so much for sharing that. And it's just funny how we met. We were at this conference, it had nothing to do with conflict whatsoever. It was the Southeastern Wisconsin Association of Talent Development. We were talking before the session kicked off, and we stumbled across conflict, and we talked about, hey, maybe this is a great opportunity to share our different approaches and our learnings around conflict. So I'm really glad that you're here today.
Yeah, no, it was fun meeting you. And I think it was ironic that two introverts meet in the back of the room, maybe not quite so ironic, but maybe a little bit ironic that it's the introverts that are leaning into how to do conflict better,
Yeah,
and using our
absolutely.
superior listening skills to figure out how we can help others do it better.
Funny you mentioned listening skills. I'm going to talk about in my session about how I've really been working really hard on listening skills. Yeah, it's something we all need to get better at. And I think in this world that we're facing right now with everything going on, I think if we spent more time listening than arguing, I think better results would happen for everybody.
Oh, agree, totally.
Cool. Well, today's topics, we've got three of them. What is conflict? And we're going to answer the question, is conflict bad? And then we'll be talking about our different approaches. So, Paula, the big question for you is what is conflict, first of all?
What I'm seeing with my clients is conflict is anytime they need to have an uncomfortable conversation. And that can be really simple of, I've heard of candidates who have two job offers and they're ghosting one because they don't have the courage to tell the other one, thank you for the offer, but I've selected somebody else. And they're not even emailing, so it's not even just sharing it's just sharing bad news or uncomfortable news that they're avoiding. And it also goes to in the workplace. I have leaders who are avoiding having conversations about career limiting behaviors of their team members because they don't want them to feel bad and they don't want to damage the relationship. Interestingly enough, they're actually damaging the relationship by not sharing that news that somebody needs to hear. I use the analogy of you get spinach in your teeth and nobody wants to tell you because it's going to be uncomfortable. But you go up on stage and you got the spinach on your teeth and everybody's looking at it and they're so distracted because that's all they notice. It's like, wow, somebody's not even going to tell me that I got spinach in my teeth. How much am I going to trust them with other things? And I've also got some clients that are dealing with some family dynamics and it's causing conflict and they're not quite sure, how do I do this? For some, it's adult children. So they're in their 50s and their parents are in the 70s. And how are we going to talk about that end of life? How are we going to do this as an adult child, and an aging parent. And so they're really struggling with, how do we have these conversations? And on the flip side, how do I have these conversations with my children that are in their 20s? So when they're in their 50s, then it's not conflict. It's just, I'm carrying out your wishes. So it's coming through in a lot of different things. And yeah, we're seeing it in the news, whether it's the international conflicts or even just within our own communities, is people don't know how to have a conversation around an uncomfortable topic.
And I'm glad you mentioned the family angle. So growing up here in Wisconsin and having the privilege of eventually becoming a senior vice president of human resources for an organization that operated in 30 different states, I see regionally how conflict is handled differently. I think here in Wisconsin, at least my upbringing was to avoid conflict at all costs, and it's not good. But that poses the next question, Paula, is conflict good or bad, or what is it?
Yeah, that whole Midwest nice.
Yes.
And interestingly, you say that with culturally, I moved around quite a bit in my career and had the opportunity to experience how other cultures do it. In the Caribbean, they're actually quite forward. But as an outsider, you hear the accent and it sounds nice, but they're being quite assertive, but that's how they communicate. So it's not necessarily seen as conflict. It's just they're upfront with things and they deal with things. But to the question of is conflict bad? I don't think conflict is bad, but I think it's done badly or poorly. And that's where it gets the bad rap, is because we don't know how to engage in conflict. I'll raise my voice. In the workplace, maybe I'm gonna tell HR. You and I have both been in HR, and you've had people say, "I'm gonna take you to HR," almost as a threat, or "I'm gonna tell my dad," as a child. So that's where I think it's done badly, and that's where people like, okay, well, this is gonna blow up in my face. I won't be able to control it. It's gonna ruin relationships. I think that's where it gets a bad rap. If it's done well, it actually can build a lot of trust. It can build synergy, but you have to get through and kind of figure out, so who do I want to be in this? What's most important? And, we don't necessarily teach that or help people navigate it. So if you approach me, my neuroscience is going to get me all jacked up. So now I'm on the defense. And now I'm ratcheting it up too. And then that triggers you. And all of a sudden we've got two people who are on the defense and we can't get to the offense. And helping people understand the neuroscience of it helps keep that conflict at a manageable intensity level, because the emotion is helpful. If I come to you and say, yeah, I'm really disappointed that you didn't do anything, you won't understand how serious it is for me. And so you might disregard it or dismiss it. And then I feel bad. So using the emotions, the appropriate emotions in conflict is where, I'll talk about emotional intelligence later on, is where we can do our own work and understand what can we control, what can't we control, but also what can we influence.
I love your quote here. Conflict is done badly. So that's what's causing the bad rap for conflict. And it sounds like almost like conflict is necessary as a species and to move things forward. And it's about how we manage it. So Paula, how do you help your clients with conflict management?
Sure. As I kind of alluded to, is my model and methodology is really around emotional intelligence and helping people understand what is emotional intelligence. When I talk to people about this, they connect with it, but most often they really just identify with empathy and self-awareness. So empathy in, my boss doesn't appreciate that I need to take this day off and they're giving me a hard time. They're not showing empathy to me. On the boss side, hey, this person doesn't appreciate the pressure I'm under and they don't care. They're just concerned with themselves. So empathy really is seen most often as too little, but empathy can also be too much. So that person who doesn't want to tell me that I have spinach in my teeth, that's too much empathy because they don't want to hurt my feelings. And that gets in the way. The other piece is the self-awareness. Are people aware of the emotions that they're experiencing? And it's deeper than the happy, mad, sad, glad. Those are what I call iceberg emotions. That's, really common. I'm happy. Well, so what are you really happy about? What's really underneath that? Same as mad. Mad can be a whole lot of different things. Could be jealousy, could be envy, and it could be anger. But when people can really get clear on the emotion that they are experiencing, it can help them understand what's really going on here and why they're upset. The next question is, so what do you want to do with that? Is anger the appropriate emotion to express in the interaction, or is there something else that might be more helpful? Because if I come to you with an anger emotion, again, our brains are wired to defend ourselves. And so you're going to defend yourself because a verbal threat is the same as that saber-toothed tiger. Okay. And you're going to want to defend yourself. But if the emotion that I'm expressing is that I'm disappointed or discouraged, that's going to have a different effect on you. Those two, discouragement and disappointment, really are rooted in sadness. So if I come to you with more of the emotion of sadness, more likely than not, your empathy is going to come forward. Whereas if I come to you in anger, your empathy probably isn't all that present when you're in your fear-based brain. And so it's harder for you to access it. But with emotional intelligence, it's understanding there's a whole spectrum of each of these elements that you see here. And there's like 16 as they stand alone, but they also work in unison with each other. So you see there's 3 under each of those 5. That's, under self-perception, it's self-regard, self-actualization, and emotional self-awareness. They also work in unison with ones in the other quadrants. So stress probably is the one that's most prevalent in conflict. And so you'll see their flexibility, stress tolerance, and optimism are directly tied to stress management. But where they interact with others is that self-actualization, the empathy, problem solving, self-awareness, and reality testing. So my work with clients a lot of times is going to be like, so what's really going on here? What's fact? What's feeling? To get them to see, okay, so what's really going on here? Was that person really dismissive, or did they need reassurance? Are they in their fear-based and it's just coming out because they're all jacked up and being defensive and they're expressing something that you see as dismissive? Is like, what's really going on here? And then saying, okay, if they need reassurance, how then should I respond? Because I still might be upset and angry that they're dismissing me. But if I express that, now it's just ratcheting up. But if I think, okay, so what do I want to express here? Okay, if it's not that I'm offended that they are dismissing me, but if I express compassion that they're feeling uncomfortable, maybe I can get them back into their executive brain. And then we can have a conversation about what's really going on here, kind of bringing in the interpersonal relationships. Is what's most important here? Is the relationship most important? Okay, so how am I going to approach that conflict if at the end of this, I want to maintain that interpersonal relationship, which means both needs are met. So again, that's that spectrum. I'm not going to be so empathetic that I'm going to back down on my needs, because then my needs aren't met. And now I'm not respecting what I need in that relationship and that interaction. So it's not a either or, it's not an all or nothing. It's what's needed at this particular point in time. And that changes moment to moment. It changes from when you're talking and when I'm talking. It's very fluid. But my work with clients is really to help them understand what emotional intelligence really is, so that they can use it as a tool and not be used by their emotions. Because the physical reaction is you feel that emotion and there's a rush of chemicals and they take you on that roller coaster. But when you can manage that you can allow that chemical reaction to happen and then say, okay, so now what am I going to do? One of the tools that I use is RAFT. So that's an acronym for results, action, feelings, thoughts. If you want to change the result, most often people are like, well, I'm going to do different actions. Okay, so I'm going to raise my voice so that I make sure that they hear me. I'm going to bring in my boss. I'm going to tell my dad. That's where I call, people get stuck in the action result loop. And it just keeps, it just keeps spinning, but you don't get any traction. If you want a different result, you actually need to go way back to your thoughts. And when you change your thoughts, you change your result. So if I change my thought about conflict, that it's not bad, that it is a way to get to a better solution, that it could be a way to enhance and build trust in the relationship, I'm going to tap into different feelings than anger, different than, say, frustration or disgust. I say, okay, so if my thought is that this is a way to build trust in the relationship, my feelings might be compassion. They might be collaboration. They might allow me to listen better, because my end result really is about that relationship and not about the topic of the conflict. Okay, so it's not about whether you took the trash out or not. It's about me feeling like you don't care about the trash that needs to be taken out because there's, we've got a holiday week and, our trash pickup is Friday, and if it doesn't go out, it's going to stink for the whole weekend. To think about what's really important here and come from that place, because the result really is about you. It's not about the conflict. It's not about the other person. It's when I end that engagement, I want to feel successful, that I did what I said I was going to do. And that's all my emotions. That's all my thoughts. And if I can leave that conflict saying, you know what, I didn't blow my top. I wasn't disrespectful. I was able to listen. I may not have gotten the answer that I wanted. I might not have won you over. But if I can leave that conversation, you know what? I did what I set out to do. I controlled my emotions. I managed. I also expressed uncomfortable emotions in a way that was honest and had integrity. Then I can leave that with my head held high, and say, you know what? I honored myself. I achieved my results, regardless of whether you changed your mind or not. I use a lot of acronyms. The other acronym I use is NATO, and it's not the North American Trade Organization. It's not being attached to the outcome, because the only outcome I can control is my own feelings, my own mindset, and not attaching to it, but still being engaged, which is hard. It takes skill, it takes practice. Then it's not about the trash. It's about the relationship. And if I can do what I need to do in order to maintain that relationship, even having a hard conversation, whether it's spinach in the teeth or it's something more critical than that, I'm gonna come at it differently and say, you know what, I did tell that person about body odor with compassion, and it was uncomfortable for both of us, but I showed respect, and I didn't just like cut and run, but I also didn't, belabor the point, because that's uncomfortable for both people. But I told them something that might be holding them back, and now they have an opportunity to address it. And then they're going to do whatever they want with it. But at least I had the courage and the compassion to tell somebody about the spinach, about the body odor, that they're turning people off with their behavior. I worked with a client last year. He was like 3 years from retirement. And the series that we were working on was emotional intelligence. And he was learning some skills on how to address behavior on his team. And in that experience, he realized he was doing things that weren't very productive. And he realized, oh, I could do this a much different way. And he said to me, it's like, I wish somebody told me this many, many years ago. He's 3 years from retirement, and just now he's discovering it. because none of his managers over the last 30 years had the courage to tell him that this isn't working. You're too assertive, you're too aggressive, and thus people aren't listening because you get all jacked up and you can't listen. And it was heartbreaking to hear him say, man, I wish somebody would have told me this. Would have been able to find a way to tell him that his approach is turning people off. Imagine what it would have been for his team members too, that he was supervising. What a different experience they might have had somebody found the courage to be able to have that hard conversation with compassion, with accountability, to be able to move it forward. And that's where I want to help people understand they're not being empathetic when they don't have these hard conversations. They're not. It's probably about the most unempathetic thing somebody can do is to not tell somebody that they've got behaviors that are not serving them.
Paula, because I'm working on my listening skills here, I thought some incredible stuff that you shared here. I love the raft. So that's obviously use emotions, not be used by emotions. So with that is, and what is the R again? Is that
The R is the result.
Results? Okay.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the action and result loop that people get stuck in, and what you're looking to do is inject also the feeling and thoughts into that process and go deeper in the root cause.
Yeah. And the other place people get stuck is you've probably heard that quote that between stimulus and response, you have an opportunity to make a choice.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was Einstein, or I think it was somebody else. But in that pause is where we make up stories. And sometimes those stories are not helpful. So I call that making stuff up, is we assign a meaning to that thought that then triggers a feeling. You didn't take out the trash because you don't care about about taking it out. So now my feeling probably is going to be frustration, maybe anger, feeling like you don't care. And then that's going to lead my actions. And then we got a result and we got to fight. Okay. All feelings come from thoughts, but not all thoughts create feelings.
Interesting.
Okay.
So it sounds like people were going up the ladder of inference when they're,
Sure. And if you think about, like how we interact with children is, they fall down and skin their knee like, oh, don't be sad. So now they associate that feeling of wanting to cry as sadness. Like, okay, so now I label that sadness. Or, they have to share a toy and like, well, don't get angry. And so now they label that feeling must be anger. We very rarely tell somebody don't be happy, those kind of things. But we label things. And if we can neutralize take a look at that stimulus and say, okay, what really happened here, and not label it, we have a better chance to managing those emotions. And then selecting, okay, so what emotion do I want to experience after having that thought? So you don't take out the trash. If I can control that, maybe I'm curious as to why you didn't take out the trash rather than anger or frustration. To then be able to, because then your actions are all based on your emotion. They're going to be consistent with that. And then that's going to drive your result. So the only way really to change the result is to change your thought, because the thought is what kind of starts the ball rolling. But it takes being aware of like, okay, what really went on here? And how can I neutralize it to say, this is just what it is. Now let's decide what emotion do we want to experience here. And sometimes anger is the right emotion. There are some things that we should be angry about. I believe every emotion serves a purpose, but it takes choice to say, okay, so what purpose? And just because you feel it doesn't mean that you need to express it. If there's a more helpful emotion or a more helpful thought that's going to help you manage that flood of chemicals that are going to get triggered, is okay. So maybe I am going to pick a different emotion to express that gets me the result that I want, because maybe it isn't a conflict associated emotion. Maybe it is curious. Maybe it's wonder. Maybe it's connection. So how do I connect with this person on this difficult topic? Where are our commonalities? And then we can talk about where we have a difference of opinion. But if you're all jacked up, there's no way we're going to resolve the conflict. We need to wait till people get back into their executive mind to be able to actually resolve the conflict. Because there's so many unresolved conflicts all over the place. Couples have it all the time, and they go back 3 years. Well, remember when you like, okay, so obviously you didn't resolve the conflict. And then it just eats at you. And I think it deteriorates the relationship. But being able to have the courage to talk about these difficult things has an opportunity to actually build trust and build the connection. But yeah, it's when it's done poorly that, friendships end, relationships end, people get fired, people don't get promoted, because all these things hold them back.
Mm-hmm. You also mentioned NATO, and I love the acronyms, right? So not being attached to outcomes, right? So kind of balancing outcomes with relationships.
Yeah, it's just realize how much can you control? And I can only control me. And just me talking louder or that type isn't going to make you respond. So if I can not attach to the outcome that is under your control, then I can also stay more in my executive brain, because I'm not allowing myself to get all derailed because of your behavior. It's like, oh, isn't that interesting? He responded that way. Huh. Okay. So where do we go from here? To just be curious, a state of wonder. Is like, oh, I wonder what must be going on. Well, another one that I use is, for a reasonable person to respond that way, what might have been happening? So it is kind of that empathy. We don't know the battles other people are fighting. So if we can kind of take a step back and say, you know what, Phillip, you're usually pretty calm, but today you snapped at me. If I take a step back and say, I wonder what must have happened in order for him to choose that response. Maybe his car broke down on the way to work, or, if you have kids, maybe they're struggling, or you just got somebody in your family got a diagnosis and that has you stressed. I'm like, okay, so maybe I can access compassion more readily. I can, access empathy more readily in an appropriate way. If I think, okay, so in order for a reasonable person to snap at me, there's probably something else going on. And maybe it's not about me. Maybe it is about something else, or it's about something with Phillip. And then I can detach, because if it's not about me, I'm like, okay, I don't have to defend myself. I don't have to attack back. If I can see, you know what, it's not always about us.
That's really powerful, and I think that ties into one other thing I wrote down here is empathy is actually having those challenging conversations and leaning into it and being curious.
Yeah, and doing it in a compassionate way, because it's not, hey, Phillip, you got spinach in your teeth. Okay, no, unless that's your relationship that you can chide and that kind of stuff. But it is pulling somebody aside and like, yeah, you got stuff in your teeth, and I didn't want you to go on stage. Oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed. Thank you for telling me. But empathy is not having those conversations. It's having the courage to do it.
Incredible stuff you just shared with us. Was there anything else on this slide you wanted to address before we go to your last slide?
No, I think that's good. Yeah. So yeah, this is the raft. So the results come from actions, the actions come from feelings, and the thoughts trigger the feelings. So just realizing that this is all connected, but then it circles around that the results that you get, what do you think about your results? Now, what do you want to feel?
Mm.
What actions are you going to take? And my clients will use this to plan their day, especially if they have if they know they're going to have a challenging conversation. They actually script this out. Say the result is I want to be able to maintain my cool. I want to make sure that I can listen. I want to be able to express my needs in a way that's respectful and courageous. All right. So what do I need to think in order to have those feelings of courageousness, good listening, that I'm receptive? And if I feel those feelings, I'm going to most likely take these actions, as well as what am I not going to do? Okay. I'm not going to disengage. I'm not going to avoid the person. If you think about leaders, if you're avoiding your team member, you're not leading them. There's a gap. If you're like, oh, you seem to coming down the hallway, it's like, oh, I'm gonna duck in here, then you're not leading them. And so, yeah, my clients will use this to plan their day, plan a meeting before they go in, and they'll get really experienced in this. So they can do this like in 5 minutes or less, to really think of, once they know the system and they get it to be a practice. They can do, but it can happen for happy things too. For those of us in HR that are planning employee events, the result is I want everybody to have a good time, that kind of stuff. All right, so let's take a look at your thoughts. So it's not just a problem solving tool. It can be used in so many different actions for you to understand, okay, this is under my control, but I need to make some choices. And I need to be aware of, what I am feeling and what's really behind that, and deal with what's really behind those emotions, so that you cure the disease, not just treat the symptoms. And sometimes that is having those hard conversations. Is just, you know what, I'm really hurt that you forgot my birthday. Because for me, if you want to use the love languages, to me, that means I think you don't love me. And that's hard for me. So can we talk about that? Rather than stewing about it, they forgot my birthday again, and all of a sudden, the other person gets on the receiving end of all of this pent up stuff. And they're like, where did this come from? Because it stacks and it stacks and it stacks. And all of a sudden you just have this volcano, and they don't know what's coming. And how are they supposed to respond when it's, and then you did this, and then you did that, and then you forgot this, and you're like, whoa, what just happened here? When the root is, because you forgot my birthday, I think you don't care about me. And if you don't care about me, then I question our relationship. And if I question our relationship, I question our future. And if I question our future, then why am I really here? It just snowballs. Yeah. Have you ever had that happen?
I think we all have.
Yeah. I know I've done it. And I saw a pattern of when I left meetings and I behaved in a way that I didn't want to, that I let my emotions get control of me. And after like 3 times, I realized, okay, that's what's going on. So now in the future, when I do need to have a conversation, I'm actually going to decide whether I need to have it then or not. Because for me, it was a combination of personal work things coming both to a head at the same time. And that was too much for me to be able to control my emotions. And so I just decided, you know what, if I don't need to handle that work thing right now. I don't need to address that conflict with my boss until I can resolve the personal stuff, because the personal stuff is going to come first. I'm not going to disregard that. But it took a couple times for me to walk out of meetings and like, oh, man, I didn't want to cry. And I knew it wasn't about that conflict. It was about the other stuff. But it was just all to a head. I'm like, okay, so now I know. I'm just going to choose, because the work stuff, it wasn't that important. It could let go. I didn't have to deal with it then. But after you have those moments, you're like, okay, so what really happened here? And kind of do your own debrief of like, okay, so that's the pattern. All right, now that I know the pattern, now I can manage it.
And I think you underscore the importance there of, having somebody to coach, right? It's hard to practice on ourselves. Part of coaching is getting those skills and developing those skills, but sometimes you're confronted with your own situation, and yes, you can untangle it, but it's also helpful to work with somebody on that.
Oh, sure. Because I can probably see where they get caught up in the story, the making stuff up between the thoughts and the feelings. And I can also point out where they're just spinning in that action result to say, okay, here's what you're just raising your voice, you're talking faster, but you're not getting different results. So let's talk about what could you do differently. As an outsider, when I know my clients well enough, I can see where they're getting in their own way. And I can, because of the relationship and the trust that we build, I can gently point that out. And they're like, oh, yeah. Because I don't talk with their managers. I'm not involved in their performance reviews or anything like that. So there's nothing outside of our relationship that's going to come back to them. Like, oh, yeah, you're right. All right, so let's talk about, how do you want to do this? What's a better thought? What's a better feeling? And what actions would you take in order to get the result that you want? Focusing on yourself to say, you know what, I want to walk out of that meeting feeling like I handled myself with dignity, that I had an honest conversation, but I wasn't a jerk, but I was forthright to say what's really at stake here. And I did it in a way that if I was watching it in a movie, I was like, you know what, that person did it well. Doesn't mean it'll be easy. It's not about ease. But it is about, doing it intentionally, and being willing to do it in a way that you're ready for, that you're willing to do, even though it may not be easy. It's what I call the good tired at the end of the day. It may not have been an easy day, but it was a good tired. I did good work. I made good effort here, but man, am I tired.
So it sounds like you have had profound impact for your clients working through some of these issues and managing conflict better.
Oh yeah, I had a client reach out to me in the last 2 weeks or so. We last spoke May, but he was referencing back to a session we had probably in the winter, and he said, that one conversation, I've been applying it, and it's been a life changer. So it is kind of that lasting impact that when we do the work and they understand and they're able to practice it, he said, it has changed relationships. And I mean, it's gratifying. I try not to be attached to the outcome because I can't. But it is gratifying to hear the work that he did through our sessions continues to serve him in a positive way.
That's just incredible. And that's why we do what we do, right, Paula?
Yeah. Yeah, because It's not just a Band-Aid.
Yeah.
We're helping people do things better and be a better leader, have less stress.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge.
Well, anything else you want to share from your approach to conflict management?
I think that was it. It's really more, about the how and the who. And then you get to the what. So who do I want to be in this relationship? And go from there, and starting from the inside and then going to the outside.
Awesome. Well, so I run workplace investigations now, and what I tell my clients is I hope that when I engage with you to do that investigation, hopefully there's an opportunity to work with you on, the coaching and the conflict management as well. So you don't need me again in the future for an investigation, right? So I think that's the power of being an HR professional that you and I are, and the approach that we take from a conflict management and a coaching perspective. I'll share the tool that I use, and I think there's going to be a lot of similarities, and in some way, I think these two work really well together. So I got interested in conflict management a few years ago because I had a couple situations that were really difficult to untangle. My approach a few years ago was to use work style assessments. Essentially we would have somebody that was maybe an introvert, extrovert. Well, that creates some tension or conflict, and you'd be able to kind of pull that apart, and people understanding where each other are coming from, really effective in resolving conflict and having better conflict management skills moving forward. Mediation, kind of the go-to for HR. We all do it. And of course that's effective as well. But then I had some of those cases that were really, really hard hard to untangle. So I'm like, there's got to be some additional tools out there that I can kind of work with my clients on to resolve these conflicts. And so I went on a search basically to find these tools. And of course, I went to all the usual sources, Harvard Business Review, and I was expecting to see the latest and greatest book on conflict management, or God forbid, some AI tool around conflict management. But it turns out I stumbled across a oldie but goodie, right? Thomas-Killman Conflict Mode Instrument, TKI for short. It's been around for 50 plus years. Millions and millions and millions of people have used it. It's kind of called the gold standard when it comes to conflict management. And so I have been using this now. It's been very impactful for myself and for my clients and other HR professionals that I interact with. And I'll be explaining more about the model here moving forward. So with that being said, I'll keep it really simple today. I mean, the simplicity of the tool, I think everybody can grasp that pretty quickly. There's more to it. There's some advanced iterations of the tool, especially when you come from an organizational standpoint. But we'll just take the TKI as it is for individuals right now. And so the theory behind there is what the research is indicating is people basically have 5 different conflict modes that they can use for any given situation. So I'll walk through these really quickly. The first one is competing, and I think we can all relate to competing. Anybody that's ever played a sport, you want to win, right? When something's really important to you, you're going to lean into it. You're going to want to win on that particular point or that issue. Or if you're interviewing for the job, you're the one that wants the job. You don't really care about the other person. And so what you see here, and the beauty of this this tool on the left-hand side, or the vertical axis there, is the assertiveness, right? So competing, you're trying to get your needs met, and you have little regard for the other person's needs in that particular situation. Accommodating is the exact opposite. So there, you're trying to meet the other person's needs, get those satisfied, and you don't really have a lot of regard or interest in your needs in that particular situation. The example I like to give is for those parents out there, your baby, your newborn baby wakes up in the middle of the night. Yeah, you're losing sleep, but you're going to make sure that the baby's taken care of. So you're leaning into that. That's on the axis of being cooperative, or cooperativeness, the horizontal axis, right? So, and then naturally something in between those two is compromising, right? So you're getting some of your needs met, and the other person's getting some of their needs met. It's but not, you're not getting all your needs met, and they're not getting all their needs met. And it's really effective when there's a time crunch, right? So this is you're up against some kind of deadline, and you basically to agree to kind of split the cow, or split the decision, or whatever the old analogy is, right? So that's compromising. Now we could stop there, but there's actually 2 other conflict modes available to us, and that collaborating is, it's gotten all the buzz here lately. We exist in this VUCA world. Things are becoming more complicated, and dare say more complex, right? And we really need to harness the power of other people and their thoughts. And quite frankly, that's the power of diversity, right? And inclusion, and having everybody at the table, and contributing different ideas. And that's collaboration. But you were mentioning, from your portion about the power of trust and developing trust. And there's 2 factors that we need to be able to collaborate, and that's time and trust. And if we don't have either one of those, then collaborating is not the right thing to use in that given situation. So again, you'll hear all the buzz about we got to collaborate more, we got to collaborate more. Well, we got to read the situation and see if we've got some of the factors leading up to possibly using collaboration to make sure it's the right thing at the right time. And then finally, there's avoiding. And avoiding is deceptively simple, but there's 2 sides to avoiding, as I like to say. So avoiding, of course, you're not engaging in the conflict at that particular situation. It could very well be that you just need more time to make a decision, and you say, look, I appreciate you bringing this up to me, but I need to think about it overnight. I'll come back with a decision tomorrow, or we can engage in this conversation. Or as you were mentioning, like the emotions, there's just too much emotion, and you've got to kind of unpack that in your thoughts. that might be a good time to use avoiding in a good way and saying, hey, I appreciate what you're saying. I just need to think about this, unwind some things. Can we talk about this tomorrow? So that's some of the good usage of avoiding. There is a downside or a dark side to avoiding, and it's spite. Spite is trying to intentionally make sure the other person doesn't get their needs met, and you're willing to run the risk of having harm to yourself. And that's not a good place to be in. And quite frankly, I think in reflection, I think spite has often gotten in the way of conflict resolution in some of those harder cases, especially with when you're trying to go through the mediation process. I like some of the things that you've mentioned today, because if we can maybe unpack that, really start working on the EQ, we can probably get in a better place and get away from spite. So I'm going to share my results here. This is the first TKI I took a while back. And what you'll notice is I score higher on the competing mode. And you might be wondering, well, is that good or bad? Well, it probably indicates in fact, I know I overuse competing, right? So my go-to, and everybody tends to have a default mode or two that they go to. They'll maybe over compete, or they'll over accommodate, or they'll over collaborate in some instances as well. So everybody has a default naturally. And with a default, then that unfortunately squeezes out some of the other conflict modes. And so in my particular case, it's kind of squeezing out collaboration. Like, that is something I've had to work really hard on over the years, is becoming a better collaborator, both in my personal life and then also in the workplace as well. And I should say the assessment is super simple. It's 30 questions. You move through it, 5 or 10 minutes, and then you get the results right away. And it's a nice guide, and it kind of outlines what all these are. And even if you don't have a coach, it's an effective tool in of itself in reviewing that information. But obviously, coupled with a coach with experience and knowing what they're doing, you could see a lot better results here moving forward. So ideally, what we want to do in working with our clients, or if you're doing this by yourself, you want to work on getting these all in the medium zone, and that's anywhere from 25 to 75%. The essence of the TKI is we want you, from a skills-based perspective, to be able to have all 5 conflict modes available to you, so you can use those given whatever the conflict is, that you're using it for the appropriate situation that you face. And so building off of that, and this is just a simple way of saying, yeah, I need to back off my competing and increase my collaboration. And so I mentioned earlier how I've done that is I've become a lot better listener. I've really intentionally trying to understand what the other person's needs and interests are. And I still want to get my needs met. I still feel that, like, I'm not going to put that away. But if we can couple what I want and what they want, and then we're getting into that collaboration space, and we have trust and we've got time, and that's the appropriate space to be in. And so that's been a game changer for me. That has allowed me to be a better husband, a better father, and a better HR person, and workplace partner as well. So it's been profound for me, and I know my clients have benefited from it as well. So some of the coaching that you would do around this is you would ask 8 key questions around the situation that we have. So we want those 5 modes available to us. And then you want to be able to read the situation. And I've shortened these questions, but like you were mentioning, stress level. If stress is way too high, then that's a bad place to be in. And we need to actually bring it down to, it can, Ralph Killman would call it stimulating stress, right? The normal kind of work day, you've got some deadlines and, tensions and stuff like that. That's great. Like, you can really thrive. In fact, all the psychological safety stuff says you need some heightened stress. Can't be overwhelming, but you need some heightened stress. If it's too low, then that's not good either. So you need that stimulating stress. But stress is one of those factors to evaluate for the given situation. So let's just say you're working with another department, right? And you're working with them on a project, and you're under a tight deadline, and there's a potential decision that needs to be made between you and that other department, and that potentially could be a bottleneck here moving forward. You want your idea or your solution to be the one chosen, but you don't also want to burn your client or your partner or your other department that you're working with. So you want to balance that, right? And given that we're under time constraints and knowing that we can't avoid this, we've got to do this, otherwise this project is going to come off the rail. It could very well be just asking these 8 questions could very well be that not collaboration, but compromising is the right choice for you given that situation. You're not going to get all your needs met, but you're going to come together in agreement to kind of keep the ball rolling. Now, if we back out of that scenario and we take, let's say time is an issue, let's say we have all the time in the world, then yeah, you're going to probably lean towards collaboration because you're going to have the ability to kind of do a deep dive on this and have those conversations that are necessary to kind of bring out all those wonderful ideas and then vet them and choose the best one here moving forward. So as you can see, if you just take 1 or 2 factors and you change it, then you have a different situation and it may end up resulting in using a different conflict mode for that particular situation. So again, that's the power of the tool is knowing what your default mode is, starting to build some of these skills around reading the situation and then using the appropriate conflict mode for the given situation. So 5-step process for having better conflict from a skills-based perspective. Again, number 1 is being able to reading the situation using the conflict questions that I just had on the screen, choosing the best conflict for the mode. So even if you're reading the situation correctly, you still got to choose the best conflict mode for that particular situation. And then, I always like to say candor with care, but in this particular case, I'm going to say conflict with care. So you're going to start engaging in that conversation. Don't be a jerk about it, right? So even if you're competing, you can say it like, hey, Paula, I just want to share with you why this is really important to me and why I think we should go this way. That's not being a jerk. You're being assertive, right? But you're not being a jerk about it. And so conflict with care would be number 3. And then switch, if any of those variables change or if you start having a different read on the situation, then be flexible on what conflict mode you're using in that particular situation. I will say that time is usually the most precious resource and also the thing that is most likely to change in a conflict situation. And then, better communication skills and trust, right? And I think this is where the EQ work that you just shared with us is really important. For me, it was the listening, right? Being able to understand the other people's needs and interests. And because if you can't do that, then you're effectively not able to use most of the tools that we just saw from the Thomas-Killman instrument, right? And then building the trust, of course, too. And so from an EQ standpoint, I've written down a ton of notes from you, and I'm going to rewatch this video here. But being able to understand yourself, your emotions, your thoughts, and how you're showing up in that particular situation, those. I think that's where that really comes in, and you can have that loop. And when working with clients, what I like to do, sure, we can throw out hypotheticals, but unpacking a situation that they just experienced this week and kind of going through these 5 steps and those 8 questions and just like some of the results that you've had, they start developing better conflict mode or ability to better handle the conflicts here moving forward. And it's been a game changer. So that's the tool I use. It's been really effective, but I am really curious how, maybe using some of the EQ work here moving forward can even enhance the work of the TKI.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, as you're talking, I see a lot of opportunities to have this be a yes and, because there are effective conflict management methodologies that are in addition and really complement something like EQ. Some of these other things, Stephen Covey's The Speed of Trust or Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. They both have methodologies of how to deal with conflict. And you need a structure. Otherwise, it can just go off the rails because nobody knows the order in which we're going to do things. So definitely, and yeah, that trust is, I think, it's something people don't realize can happen through resolving conflict. Because when you can have productive yet difficult conversations and you both walk out and you're not all clawed up by that saber-toothed tiger, you're like, okay, I didn't you didn't tear me down, and I didn't tear you down. And being able to do those things, I think that's where the trust is built, is that, yeah, he wasn't a jerk about it, or she wasn't a jerk about it. It wasn't easy. It was hard to hear, but she listened. And I was able to talk, and I could hold my head up high leaving that. When you work with clients, I'm guessing that several people would fill out this assessment.
Yeah, so that is the power. It's a very flexible tool. And you mentioning that reminds me is sometimes what we'll do is, like, say we have a team, right? And so we'll have them fill this out. What we often see in organizations is you might have a boss that's high on competing. And then as you move down that team from a hierarchy standpoint, you'll see folks that are just checked out. They are in the avoiding mode at the bottom. And so that is really telling of what's going on there. And it's eye-opening for the team, and especially for the boss.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, I can totally see that. That or accommodating is, the boss gives this direction and
Yes,
I'm just going to accommodate. Um,
absolutely.
does a tool, when somebody's under stress, is their tendency to go to like your graph? So if you're really under high stress, are you, even though you need to access the other ones, are you going to more easily access the competing one because that's your habit?
So Ralph Killman will tell you that at that point, if it's really high stress, then you're using a different part of your brain. And
Okay.
so then you're into the three F's, right? Fight, flight, and
Okay.
what's the
Freeze.
other one? Freeze. Yes.
And I've heard
Yes.
fawn is a fourth one. So
Oh,
fawn, I think, would
interesting.
be like the accommodating. I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna fawn all over you. Oh, you're the greatest guy. Okay. Um, that's more recent, like in the last year or two. So, but yeah, fight, flight, freeze.
Yeah, so essentially those tools are no longer available to you because you're using a different part of your brain and not
Okay.
being able to approach it effectively.
Okay. So in your work with clients, how does it happen so that they understand how to access, like to go from 87 to 15 and bring those two to the center? I'm guessing takes some work and some exploration. So how does that happen?
Yeah, so it's scenario based, or if something, we're just in a normal coaching situation and we've done one of these, right? And we see something that we want to work on, then we do ask those 8 questions and we get better at identifying the situation and identifying what tool we should be using. And then you start having those, earlier you mentioned about action and results. Well, here in this particular case, if you're starting to have better outcomes, you're like, oh, wow, this really works. If it didn't work, then we'll kind of pull it apart and see, okay, what went wrong? And sometimes what it is it's that conflict with care that we were talking about earlier. It could very well be, yeah, you're diagnosing it correctly, you're using the right mode, but your delivery could be a little bit better.
Mhm. Okay. And as you explained it, I imagine that these modes can be pretty fluid, at least in your mind, in just a single conversation. Is like, oh, they're in competing, so I'm going to tap into this, or we're both going to be competing. Is it that fluid?
Yeah, that would be the ideal state. It's like you're able to quickly read on things, and especially if you're in a very dynamic environment and being able to read the situation in the particular conflict. And I do like the tie-in, the EQ, like being able to recognize that, okay, well, this person's competing. I wonder why they're competing. And that's where you'd be like, I want to make sure I'm understanding their needs and what they're trying to get to. And, if hopefully we're talking about ideas, right? Because if we're talking about ideas and you're being able to separate out yourself and the emotions from it and stuff like that, then you can get into that really good collaboration space and make some really good music together.
Oh, sure, yeah. So a lot in my history in HR, we were in unionized environments,
Mm,
and not in everyone did we enter negotiations, but when we were in negotiations, conflict was it was a daily thing, not just in the negotiation room, but in the workplace. Do you do any work with teams on that?
when it comes to unions in particular, I have not done that yet. I've
Okay.
not had I've always been in a non-union type of environment, but I do think what I do see is sometimes you'll have two teams that are not meshing, right? And so some of the more advanced tools that the Ralph Killman has is actually being able to diagnose not only what conflict modes you're using within the organization, um, but what might be causing you to use those conflict modes. So it could very well be that you've got some culture going on in the organization that you're reacting to. It could be that you have an ineffective team, or the organization has like a reward system that either awards or punishes a certain type of conflict mode handling in the organization. You think of sales teams, right? For example, I've met a lot of insurance salespeople over the years, and when you go out with them and you share some drinks, and they'll talk about the behind the scenes stuff and how territorial they are, and it's like, they could very well have stumbled across the same client and they are like really competing. It's like, from an HR perspective, I'm like, why don't you guys just split it? Right? It's like, no, we can't do that. So, that's a situation where the organization is rewarding that particular behavior.
Yeah, no, and as you talk, I see that even in some of the communities that I belong, that are all coaches, and people are very hesitant to share, what clients they're working in, because I think they probably fear that somebody's going to go after them.
Yeah.
And that may happen, but where that conflict kind of gets in the way, and self-confidence and all that kind of stuff, that, I could see this also be helpful when you just have two people that are not being able to communicate. It may not even be teams, it may just be individuals within a department, that relationship is just difficult. And for people to realize that self-awareness, I think, is key. Like,
Absolutely.
That's what I'm doing, that's what he or she is doing. Okay, so where do we go from here?
So Paula, like, we thought we would probably spend 20 minutes talking about this total. We have gone the whole hour. I'm sure you've got a client to get to. My takeaway from this call is I think we should have another one of these pretty soon. And the imagery in my head is I'm going to take my tiki and put it on your raft. And I think that's a winning combination.
Oh yeah, no, I think that would be powerful. Yeah, to see how they interplay. Because we're all interconnected. There's nothing that happens just as a singular thing. There's a relationship everywhere. And it's exploring that to say, so what is your relationship with conflict? But definitely, I would love to have another conversation.
Awesome. Well, that's a wrap for today, Paula. It was really good to see you. And who would have known when we stumbled across each other a month ago, and two former HR executives at a All Things Talent Development Association meeting, and we started talking conflict. So I'm really glad that we had this conversation today.
Yeah, no, thanks for initiating it. It's been interesting to learn about your tool and how these two things work together.
And likewise, the raft and the NATO. I can't wait to review this, and I'm sure our clients are going to be looking forward to this as well.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, Paula. Well, have a great day.
Thanks. You too.